Whakataka te hau ki te uru. Whakataka te hau ki te tonga. Kia mākina ki uta. Ki mātaratara ki tai. E hi ake ana te atakura. He tio, he huka, he hauhu, tihei muri ora. Tēnā koutou katoa. My name is Billy Van Utrecht, and I'll be introducing the seminar speakers today. So, no mai haere mai ki te Māori and Antarctica Ka Mua Ka Muri seminar series. We're now on seminar 3, and we welcome Dan Hikuroa to the stage. But before we do, I just wanted to introduce ourselves more broadly. Ko Billy Van Utrecht tōku ingoa, no ahi te reiria hau, no ngā rauru, tūhoi me Ngāti Nīralanda hau. Ai. So I'll be your facilitator for the series as we go, and you will have seen lots of faces already on your screen, and over time, instead of meeting for everybody every time we have a seminar, over time you'll get to know us through as we each take our turn in presenting. So if you did want to engage with exactly who we are, just please go to the website and you'll be able to see everyone who's involved and get to know them a little bit. So this series, Māori and Antarctica Ka Mua Ka Muri, so that Ka Mua Ka Muri is really important here. We're trying to create a space where hapu and iwi can start looking back into the past of our history of connection to Antarctica by whakapapa and whanaungatanga, and then really starting to think about, based on that history, where do we want our relationship to go in the future? And then based on those sorts of aspirations, what do we need to be doing now to achieve them? So hopefully this seminar series creates that space for hapu and iwi in particular to start to define that kaupapa as we go forward. It seems to be a kaupapa that's been kicking around for a fair bit of time, and hopefully this provides a foundation and a platform for it to move forward. So thank you very much for coming along. More and more people are rocking up now, and just to remind everyone that we are recording these. So if you can't attend all 8 seminars, we'll have the opportunity for you to come back and engage through the website. Each recording will be embedded on the pages through which you signed up to it. So don't be too worried if you can't attend all. In terms of questions, we really want to make sure that this feels like a two-way and is a two-way conversation. So please engage if you have questions while our speakers are presenting. Chuck it in the chat channel. I think we'll just go for the chat channel from now on. It seems to get a bit confusing otherwise, and it's easier for us. So we have a bilingual research team. So Scylla's going to be facilitating anybody's questions in the reo, so please feel free to kōrero in the reo. My capacity is pretty limited there, so Scylla and I will be a team in terms of questions. So as you have questions while Dan's talking, please pop them in there, and we'll come back after about a half an hour presentation, Dan? Yeah? Yep. Right. Cool. All right, so we'll come back and then ask the questions there, and hopefully it's a really cool kōrero that we can have together. Yeah, so I might, without further ado, I'll just welcome you, Dan, to the seminar series. It's amazing to have you. I think you've been a massive draw card for us. You're certainly making us look good by being on the ballot. So thanks for coming along and having a kōrero that I know from the response we've gotten in the registrations is something everyone's really keen to hear. So I might just, if Scylla and Scylla, did you want to introduce yourself at all?
Not really, just to say kia ora everybody, great to see you all. Billy and I are both involved with the Vision Mātauranga team. Oh, and here's Te Warahi as well. So we're all in the Vision Mātauranga research team for ROSRAMP, and please explore the pages. Also, if you want to send us more questions after, we'd be really happy to hear from you.
We've had an amazing response. Yeah, we've had amazing response just since yesterday, and lots more registrations. So we're almost up around 200 people registering. Obviously not everyone's going to rock up to every presentation, but yeah, those numbers are up there and shows everyone's really keen. Okay, Te Warahi, did you want to introduce yourself just quickly? Oh, you're on mute, Matua.
Well, I was going to say, having asked him to do that the other day, and he was very humble and yeah, difficult for him to actually talk about all of his achievements. But just to say that Te Warahi's been a really integral and important part of our research team. So he's kaumātua from Ngāti Wai up in the north, and has brought some incredible whakaaro to our research. So kicking it off with whakairo, as we talked about on Monday. But yeah, continuing to offer us lots of pearls of wisdom.
Right. Okay, awesome. Well, we might just kick over to you then, Dan, if you want to take control of the screen. The rest of us will fade away and you're in control. And then we'll come back in the end and facilitate questions.
All right. Well, kia ora mai tātou katoa. E Billy, tēnā koe mō tō kariki e whakatūwharetia. Te kōrero o te rānei. Kia koutou katoa. E zui mai nei pia. Tēnā koutou katoa. He mokopuna tēnei o Ngāti Maniapoto, Waikato Tainui hoki. Kei te mahi au I nai nei te wānanga o Waipapa. Kei te whare wānanga o Tāmaki Makaurau. Nā te mea I ngā tau o ngā iwa taus, the 90s, he geologist hau. So I'm just going to jump onto my PowerPoint presentation now, and we'll go on a bit of a journey. Ka pai. So for my PhD, I undertook a project for the British Antarctic Survey, leading an expedition in Antarctica to study some rocks that were of Jurassic age. And our intent was to discover more about them and how things might happen. The reason I found myself leading a project out of New Zealand, but for the British Antarctic Survey, was twofold, but primarily because the head of the British Antarctic Survey Geoscience Division was good mates with my supervisor, and he wanted, the British Antarctic Survey wanted him to be part of this research. And secondly, some initial reconnaissance work in the area where I was going to do the field work had showed similarities of the faunas in the rocks, of the animals, the fossil animals in the rocks, to be similar to coeval rocks in New Zealand. So they wanted someone who could come from New Zealand, who could go back to all those collections and all those learned people and bring that in as part of the rangahau. And so I've just put a little bit of a dot there to show you roughly where New Zealand is relative to this map. If I just click on, oops, see, ka pai. So the project was part of, as I said, the British Antarctic Survey, trying to understand superterranes or plate tectonics, trying to understand how things like Gondwana, how they break apart. And so we were looking to study the rocks, because the rocks hold part of the whakapapa of the history of that area. You know, the sediments and I was looking all at sedimentary rocks. So I was looking at the paleontology, the critters that used to live there, and the sedimentology, the types of things that the rocks are made up of. So if it's made up of sand, it can tell you about the history of that. And if it's made up of mud, it can tell you about the history. And if it's made up of gravels, it can tell you about the history. And so we're looking at trying to go to an area that had been just a few people had gone through, but hadn't been mapped in detail. And we're trying to understand and document the fossils, the relative order of the way that these strata, these sedimentary deposits were laid down, and as the faunas changed through time, trying to understand what those were. Yep, so we see there. The field work was undertaken in the summer of 1999-2000. Most of you around the world were worried that your computers might not work after a certain date had passed. We weren't worried so much because our hammers and our compasses and our cameras weren't digital, so we figured we were safe, and our tents and stuff weren't digital. And so, yeah, looking to document what critters were living in the oceans around Gondwana at that time. And biostratigraphy is the relative order that those things occur in. And one of the interesting things there is that we know the order of the critters in New Zealand, and we know the order of the critters in South America and Australia and South Africa, remembering all these places were part of Gondwana. And so we were going down to Antarctica to try and map out what the relative order of the critters was down there. And as you can imagine, it cost a lot of money to get a field program underway in Antarctica. And so we were given, our collection permit was to collect as much data as necessary. And although the picture is a little bit pixelated out, this is a collection of fossils from one particular locality. We would collect them up, we would label them all, wrap them up, put them into boxes, and then those boxes had to get freighted back to New Zealand from Antarctica. But because the British Antarctic Survey were doing it, I think these are almost the most well-travelled fossils in history. They went from Antarctica to the UK, then back to New Zealand, then back to the UK again. If they had air miles, they would be gold member status by now. So yeah, we were there to try and collect the data, and that is both in the form of using geological mapping techniques, recording what the different types of rocks are, recording the orientation of those rocks and whether they'd been tipped over or whether they're nice and horizontal as they'd been laid down. And principally to collect those fossils. And so after the end of the PhD, I documented 171 species. Mostly these things were marine organisms, and mostly they were marine little critters like shellfish and echinoderms, and I'll show you a few examples of those. But they were predominantly bivalves. So things like mussels, pippies, cockles, things with two shells, scallops. The cephalopods, that might be a new word to some. Those are the things, if you've ever collected the ram's horn or the sheep's horn things from the beach, that's a form of cephalopod. And a few of those, there were some echinoderms, kind of like in the Kinna family, gastropods like snails, brachiopods. They're a form of organism that used to dominate the oceans in the Paleozoic, and then they're still around today, but they're nowhere near as common. And a few vertebrates, but as you can see, 95 species of bivalves. Actually, before we proceed any further, I forgot to say I've got a little piece of Antarctica with me here today. It's not a fossil, it's just a little piece of granodiorite that I accidentally forgot to send back with the rest of the collection. So that's just sitting here to have us a little reminder of Antarctica while we're going through this little corridor. And the area where I was working was on the Antarctic Peninsula. So you can see the blow up there on the side. And that is where the main British base is of Rothera on Adelaide Island, which is on the western side of the Antarctic Peninsula. And the area where I did my field work is hopefully a little red dot has appeared there, yes, is over on the eastern side of the peninsula. And I was in the field living in a tent for 78 days, and we had skidoos, and we did about 1,000-kilometre traverse, mapping out the rocks and mapping out the critters in the rocks as we went. Okay, so a few more of the kind of the practical things. How did you get around? To get down, I was leading what's called a deep field expedition. There were 2 of us for most of the time, and for 2 weeks there were 4 of us. So it's myself and a field assistant. This was home for that 78 days, and this was how we got to our home. They flew us in. It takes 3 plane loads in these twin otter planes that are ski equipped. You can just see on the bottom there, to bring an entire field camp in. You've got 2 skidoos, you've got the tent, food and people, and it's 3 plane loads. So once you get back to costs, you've got to have fuel to run them, you've got to get all the gear there and get people down. Yep, so that's me. That was home. A few things to point out. We had a solar panel there, and the sole purpose of the solar panel was to keep our radio charged and operational. And in fact, you can see the antennae there. It was a shortwave radio, and the one scheduled thing we had to do every day was to radio back to base at a set time and tell them that we were alive and well, tell them what our intentions were, and tell them what we completed in the last day or 2. And other than that, because of course you've got 24 hours of sunshine, we could work in our own schedule. Not much else to point out here. Oh, one other thing. You could probably imagine, you know, going to map rocks in Antarctica might be a bit crazy because it's 99% covered in snow and ice, and that's true. But hopefully you can see in the background and in a few of the images as we work through, you can see that it's there are little outcroppings of rock here and there, and those were where we'd planned out our field season ahead of time. Of course, there's a lot of planning. We've mapped out where we wanted to go, and so the planes dropped us off in one place, and we worked the rocks around there. And once we'd finished there, if it was near enough, we would strike camp, put everything on this our sleds. We had 2 sleds and 2 skidoos. Shift camp to the next place, and then we'd work the rocks around there. There was one time when we got resupplied where we asked to go up for a recon to just get a bit of a look. We weren't too sure whether we wanted to go to this place or that place. We had a fly and kind of these rocks look better, and there was also some nasty crevassing there, so we went to that one. Those were our main mode of transport other than walking. So two skidoos, 2 snowmobiles, and you can just see the edge of one of the sleds there. Whenever we were traveling between places, either from camp to field outcrops or from camp to the next camp, we would always be roped together. And at the very least, we would have 1 sled in between us. This is all about safety, remembering, you know, we're a significant distance from anywhere. We were 5 hours flying from the base, from Adelaide, and they had to fly and refuel twice to get to us. So you want to minimise any mistakes. There is literally no room for error, and you don't want to get things wrong. And so one of the things is always be roped together in case you hit a crevasse or get in trouble. And whilst the last images have been taken in beautiful, glorious sunshine days, some days it was a little bit more like this, where you could barely see your hand in front of your face. I recall one time when it sounded like a 747 jet was taking off outside the tent, and I'll just go back 1 slide. Sorry, 2 slides. You can see the guy ropes. The guy ropes were vibrating that fast. It was like just a high-pitched scream as the wind blew, and that was the severity of the wind. It was at a nearby base, they recorded winds of 144, I think, kilometres per hour, and so we think we must have been around about that. There were times when I didn't think the tent was going to survive, but by crikey, it earned its keep. And then this is an image taken from one of our reconnaissance flights, just trying to get a sense of the types of rocks we want to work in. In fact, we definitely didn't want to work on here because it's overlying significant crevassing. So you'd have to excuse kind of the great adventurer pose up on top of the cliff there. But the main point of showing this slide is that literally your vision was limited by the curvature of the earth. They may look like small hills in the distance, but those are massive mountain ranges, you know, many, many kilometres, tens of kilometres away. And that was one of the things you had to adjust to, was that your sense of depth perception was just completely off because there was no aerosols in the air, there was virtually no cloud, at least where we were. And it's an important point to make. Most of the work we did was at about 1 kilometre's elevation above sea level. That kept us above the sea fog, which can sometimes come in off the Ronnie Ice Shelf, which lay to the east of the Antarctic Peninsula. And yeah, so we had an approach to field work, which was, if either of us felt up to it, or sorry, if both of us were up to it, and the conditions allowed it, then we would get out and we'd be doing work. And on the good clear days, we would go to the sites that were further afield, and we would always try and make a camp nearby to some rocks, so that if the weather conditions weren't as good, but we could flag out a route to those near rocks, we could be doing work in conditions where it was unsafe to travel on skidoo, but nevertheless was fine to just walk over or ski. We had cross-country skis, you could get over to those areas. The British Antarctic Survey till that time had allowed for about 50% of any length of field time to be kind of layup, where it was conditions didn't allow field work to take place. With the new method that we brought in, particularly for geological field work, we had about 70 to 75% active time, and this has now become the method they use because the recognition that, you know, you camp close to some rocks and you work those when the conditions are inclement, and when the conditions allow, you go a little bit further afield. So once again, here we are collecting up very, very old dead shellfish. How old are these things, you might be thinking? We'll talk about that in just a second. I'll just show you a few images of some of the fossil material. In these images, every scale bar will be 1 centimetre unless it states otherwise. So this is kind of like a sardine, you know, the backbone of a fish, and this is the other side of it. This was another type of ancient fish, got the scales running down there. This was cool. This was the tooth of an ichthyosaur, a marine reptile. Would have been, you know, one of the teeth that fall into the jawbone like that. I'll just show you a few select examples of some of the things we've found. So the two on the left are examples of new species of a type of cockle. This is a modern version of the same group. They're called the trigoniids. They're a very ancient form of bivalve. These were all new to science, never been described before. And the pinna is kind of similar to the horse mussel that you might recognise today. And the pronoella is kind of similar to the Dosinia shells that you might find on the beach today after a bit of a storm. And just trying to give you a sense of what a day in the life of doing fieldwork in Antarctica was. And so, you know, as I said, if either of us felt up to work, then we would go and work. And then as soon as one of us said, I'm tired now, we would say, cool. One of us is tired, and then we would go back to base, cook some food, go to sleep. If we had to set the alarm to be in time for our scheduled chat with base, then we would do that. But that was how we operated. So as you can see, you know, where we were, the ambient temperature was about 5 to 10 degrees below zero. So with every breath you took, you were losing body heat. So we had to have a pretty high calorific content diet to ensure that your body was metabolizing just to keep you warm. And so I had to eat, chocolate lovers out there, I had to eat a medium-sized bar of Cadbury chocolate every day. And even then, you know, I came back kind of in the best kind of condition, not like I am post-COVID, than I ever was. In addition, my field assistant was really good at creating meals out of virtually nothing. He would get 2 billies or 2 pots, and he'd whip up a bread or a cake, and had this little kind of metal coil thing where you'd turn the heat up and it would say that's burning and that's kind of not cooking, and you sort of move up to the middle. He created these amazing things. And you can also see here, we've got any climbers out there will recognise this sort of paraphernalia. Every time we went on the skidoos, we had to put on our climbing harness, rope onto our skidoo, so we'll be connected. It was once again a safety thing. And this is just a shot of a really nice day out in the field. Collected up a few specimens of fossils. One interesting point here is, due to conditions sometime between the Mesozoic and the Jurassic, and now there've been slightly acidic conditions. So all the original shell material that these fossils were in the first place has been dissolved away. And so what we get left is like the molds or the casts. And so every single image you've seen, yes, every single image you've seen is actually a latex cast of it, so that you can actually get the impression of the positive part of it. Well, in fact, sorry, most of the images you've seen. These, I took plaster cast molds and then, latex molds and then plaster cast them. So these are a form of large bivalve. You can see there would have been, you know, a bit of a handful. There would have been horse mussel size from about 160 million years ago. Doing for time, we're doing good. Another new species of kind of mussel type shell. Once again, you get a sense there for the rock and the terrain that we're working in. Working through with, you know, either climbing boots or with kind of these really heavy duty kind of muck-like boots is what they were called. A few more fossils here, and you'll be interested maybe in the name of this one, Malayo Maorica. Malayo, I mean, it comes from kind of the Malayo area, and Maorica means it's coming from New Zealand. So I'll pick up some of those themes a little bit later on in the presentation. another, you know, with the genus Malabarika, different species this time. And then we have some of the ammonites. These are some of the more charismatic, if you will, of the fossil materials. That the image down on here on the bottom left is actually the second largest ammonite known in the world, and it's from South Kawhia. And if anyone's familiar with that area, it's from Whakapiro Road. If you go to Te Papa, or if you've been to Te Papa, you will have seen at least a fiberglass impression, an exact replica of the original one, which is actually down in the stores. But hopefully I haven't ruined your experience at Te Papa with sharing that bit of information. But of course, these ones being nectonic, they live in the water column and they can kind of control where they go. They tend to be found much wider spread than the bivalves, which tend to be kind of restricted in the areas. They don't tend to spread around too much. Here's some of the snail shells, and I'll just put a couple of modern forms in there just to give us a sense of what, you know, what they're kind of like. You know, this is a modern shell from New Zealand, and this is some of the fossil ones. So you can see these scale bars are actually 5 millimeters. These are micromollusks, if there's any taxonomists or malacologists out there. A couple of examples of just wonderful collections of micromollusks. And then if the wind blew for any more than 2 or 3 days and there was loose snow, it tended to kind of build up and snow you in. So you had to get out every now and again and either dig out your tent or dig out your radio pole, or dig out those are either rock stores or food stores, to make sure that you could keep you could get in and out of your tent and function when you wanted to. A little bit more about some of the little critters we found. These are some modern images on the deep sea of things called sea lilies or crinoids. Kind of a big stalk here with some arms and then a big fan. And this fan was used to kind of, it would orient its fan into the current and would filter feed out all the little things. Its stalk, and all of these are made up of tiny little pieces of shell material. And these are kind of like little discs. The entire thing is made of little discs. And so this is an example from Germany, a beautiful, just a whole lot of them have just died and fallen over. This is an example from Antarctica, one we found. You can see the stalk, little arms, and just the makings of that little fan on top that used to filter feed out the things. That's actually tiny, an amazing small example of that. And here's another, once again, a modern example of the discs in these crinoids. And then these are some of the shots of some of the discs we have in this new species of crinoid that we discovered from down there. So this is when they're all stacked up in a pile, and this is if you look on the top or underneath. You can see they're really interesting places where they articulate together. And they change from being kind of pentaradial, which is quite pointy, to pentalobate, which is a lot more curved on the ends, and that allows the thing to rock back and forth and adjust itself into the current. And the point I made earlier about trying to kind of map out the orientation of the bedding, you can see that this strata, you know, this would have been deposited horizontally. When it was deposited in the oceans offshore of Gondwana, it would have been horizontal, but it's been, you know, rolled around and twisted and tipped up and then squeezed. And so sometimes you've got these folds in here, other times it's kind of like zigzag folds. So my job was to try and decipher and unentangle all of this based on the geology, the fossils, and the sediments and the way we saw things there. Yep, more critters. Gosh, I'll try and start to wrap this up here. So, yeah, kind of the great explorer pose there. My field assistant was all about reenacting those. But in the background, hopefully you can see there were some crevasses in this glacier. This glacier was about 3 k's wide. And so these were probably 30 to 40 meters across at that point. You know, significant crevasses. We didn't want to go near those things. And sometimes when you're working away in the fog, it would just build up of you. Any of you have been down to Alexandra or Twizel or Queenstown even in the winter know about all the hoarfrosts there. And this is kind of a similar thing we were getting, the build up of the ice and what we call riming on us and on all our gear. This is, wow, you're not supposed to have favourites, I know, but this is one of my favourites. It was a brittle star. Some of you may have seen brittle stars if you're divers or if you're into the kind of seashore ecology. They're little sea stars, but they move super fast. So we had actually 2. We found some spines from ancient forms of kina, echinoderms. You can see that's the articulation point, the boss, and this is some of the different types of the ornament on the spines. And this is just a modern tropical one just to give you an example. And then, yeah, to show you a little bit more, I may have seen this, but you can see here from a paleoecologic consideration, this is what we call in life position. This horse muscle type thing was living right next to this kind of cockle type thing, and they've been preserved as they were alive. So they haven't died and then washed around on the beach and then been deposited. They've actually either died and been covered up, or an earthquake has dropped them down and they've been covered up, or there's been a big landslide and it's covered them and killed them. Here's some oysters. Gosh, thinking about those buff oysters at the moment. Very nice. And so this is just another example of camp. The twin otters coming in, resupplying us, or taking away rocks. And that was effectively my life for 78 days. As I said, we did a 1,000K traverse, collected a whole lot of material. And one of the things we did do, once I described all the fossils and looked at things, we can see that, there's lots of affinities with New Zealand. Kawhiana, well, this is something that's gone from Kawhia. Aucklandirhynchia, a type of brachiopod. So all of this list of things here were found in Antarctica, where I was, and are also found in New Zealand. Some of these other things were found in the Andes in South America, so they have links with that part. Oopsie, sorry. Austral affinities refers more to kind of a southern region. And so, all of those things listed there were found in the Austral region, and so on and so forth. And so one of the things we're looking at there is trying to look at the similarities and the differences between different areas. So I'll actually go back to this slide and just cover a few other points really quick. As I said early on, I was pretty much a scientist who was Māori going on his dream trip, goodness me, Antarctica. And so I was describing things, and I didn't really have mātauranga in mind when I was doing the work. And to be honest, I don't think that was the intent. The intent was to map out the work. But if I had to reflect back now, on my journey since then with postdoc and climate change, and then taking on a role trying to realise community dreams and aspirations, initially at the Institute of Earth Science and Engineering, and then on to Ngā Pai Te Maramatanga, and now, of course, into Wānanga Waipapa. I like to think back that, ultimately what I was whakapapa of those rocks. I was going down and I was observing things, and I was taking detailed notes, and I was bringing those things back together, and then I was trying to tell a story to explain what I'd seen. You could frame that in terms of I was trying to look at what the whakapapa of that was, and there's a strong whakapapa link to New Zealand, of course, that was very clear in the faunal work. And so then thinking, nowadays on that, well, how does one exert one's mana? How does one say, hey, actually, Māori have an interest in these things, or a Māori way or a Māori lens of looking at these things is of interest as well. One of the places where you can exert your mana as a researcher, and particularly as a taxonomist, is in the naming of species. So, you could, if you chose, you could put some Māori names onto those new species, whether or genus, whatever it is you're describing. And as the researcher, you have the mana to do that, provided you run through the kind of peer review process. No one really questions you on the etymology, on your rationale for the names that you choose. But somewhere else where I had a lot of difficulty was I was also trying to, there's a process for getting the places where you've done work named. So there might be a ridge, or a group of rocks, a small mountain. And it was important to me, if I was describing a new species of something, instead of saying it was on ridge R7501, which we could link back and then put some geographic markers on, I wanted to put some names onto them. And I wanted some names to reflect people who had helped me on the journey, and the names that reflected who I was. So I tried to get some Māori names and also some names of people who my field assistant and my supervisor. But I came up against some pretty hard boundaries in that space. And their rationale was, well, you know, this is quite a privilege and an honour to have, you know, something named after you in Antarctica. And so, you know, we don't think the justification you've given for any of these names that you put forward hold true. So we're not going to follow through with those. And it was at a time when I was quite busy with other things, and I didn't pursue it as hard as I could. But that's something that I think could be open for discussion if you know, if we want to thinking about how mātauranga might manifest itself down in Antarctica or in our aspirations for down there. You know, place naming could be and should be one of those. Another thing that I was really, really challenged by, and I even tried to kind of push back, was the fact that wherever we made camp, excuse the kind of the potty stuff, but we had, you know, human functions took place. All our rubbish, our food waste rubbish, that was all bagged up and taken out. But, you know, wherever we were, we would set up a kind of a toilet area and we would do our stuff and then we would leave it behind. And I was unsettled by that and discomforted by that, but I couldn't do anything about it. I tried to argue that, you know, if it's frozen, you just pick it up when it's frozen, or you just have a bag down there in the first place, do your stuff in the bag, frozen, take it out, deal with it later. That was something that was really picked up on. But if I had to reflect back, you know, I think if the question that was going to be asked was how do we map this out, I think I'd do a lot of the work the same, if I was to go back down again, sorry. But I might feel a bit stronger about pushing harder on place names and harder on waste. So what I think I'll do now is, in the interest of maybe opening up some time for discussion, I'll come off screen sharing. Or maybe I can leave screen sharing up and maybe ask our other panelists to bring up their images as well. Unless you have a protocol that says I should take the screenshot down, Billy.
No, that's fine. That's good framing for the conversation, I think. Thank you so much for that, Dan. That's awesome. I've got 1,000,001 questions, but probably the more comments just to pick up threads of conversation that you've really kicked off. I don't want to steal the thunder from the chat channel though, so I might just go through there. Ocean Mercia, kia ora, Ocean.
Kia ora, Ocean.
She's one comment. Cool photos, British flag. So, did you just want to explain the British flag?
I was there under the British flag, under the sovereignty of the British people, because I was there as part of a British Antarctic survey. I did have my field assistant on though and say, you're missing 3/4 of the flag. You've got that one piece in the corner, but the rest of what happened? Yeah, Paitoa, Ocean.
I guess I would want to pick up on that point. So you were there under the auspices of a different nation, not New Zealand. Obviously, we have whakapapa to Britain in a lot of ways. In terms of thinking about whakapapa and whanaungatanga between Aotearoa and Antarctica, do you think we can broaden those concepts? So when we're applying these Māori worldviews to thinking about Antarctica, can we broaden it out to start thinking about other landscapes as well?
Yeah, there's a couple of ways I'll answer that. I think trying to get a sense of sovereignty and flag, you know, placing the flag and ownership. That's a concept that's kind of entirely foreign to Māori. So that idea in and of itself wouldn't be kept up with. But having trying to think about how Māori might have more of a presence down there, I think we should operate out of that sovereign framing and just say, well, this is our whakapapa. Let's frame it in our terms. And so we have kōrero, we have pūrākau that talk about this. This is part of our history. It's part of who we are. It's not a sovereign claim, but it's part of who we are.
Yeah. So viewing the landscape through a different worldview, I guess.
Yeah, viewing the landscape as your ancestor.
Yeah. Cool. Got a comment from Martin Marisus, which I'm sure I'm pronouncing incorrectly. There's some possible correlations between your work by with the Auckland Museum and Ngāti Kuri in the far north and Kermadex. So I guess looking at that relationship between broader landscapes as well.
Yeah, and it also might be talking about, gosh, and I need to be careful about what I say here. I don't want to pre-publish, but they are working with Ngāti Wai on naming new things. So I think it might be referring to that. So both the nature of having an institution working with a people and also going through that kind of formal scientific process, but putting the Māori spin on it and having Ngāti Wai integrally involved in that process. So yeah, watch the space is what I'll say there. A nice tantalising ad. So
can I just jump in, because there's a great question on the Q&A which relates to that, Dan. So
yes.
It says great point about the place names and the power they have, especially in a place like Antarctica. Have things changed at all since your trip in terms of naming places? Is there more openness to using names like those you proposed, or using naming to make the Māori presence more visible down there?
The answer to that is I don't know. That was something that I tried to do it at the time, and I was rebuffed, and then I've just been too busy back then. But if that could be a potential outcome of the Ross Ramp project is to pick that up, and maybe a lot of things have changed since 2001. In the world, and so there could be an opportunity to kind of readdress those questions. But to the best of my knowledge, no, I don't think I haven't progressed anything in that space. I don't know if others have tried to do similar things.
Okay, we've got another really cool question. This is practical. Was the traverse done by linked skidoo travel by just the two of you?
Yes.
Was that normal back then?
Yes, that was part of standard operating procedure for the British Antarctic Survey. Yeah, we would just, once we'd finished doing the work, we would travel, if it was field work from a base like we have here on the screen, we would have front skidoo, rope, sled, second skidoo connected to the sled. But if we were shifting camp, it was, skidoo, sled, roped up to the next skidoo with the other sled.
Cool.
Okay, I've got a question as well. So people, just remember, no question is too trivial for Dan. Whatever comes to mind, please do ask. So I've got a question. Did you negotiate the kinds of food that you had with your field assistant, and especially chocolate? This can be contentious. So you were in a tent for what, 78 days? That's a very long time to share with somebody, right?
So the chocolate thing, it was mandatory. It was compulsory to have one of those bars each per day. It was, that was BAS orders. You basically signed up. If you're going to go in the field with us, you're going to abide by blah, 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 blah. And one of those abide by was you have to eat that chocolate. I found all sorts of amazing ways. One of the best one, and I still do it from time to time, usually around Easter, is dissolve chocolate into your porridge. Oh, heaven. But the other thing, and I think it's kind of past history now, so there's no possibility of him getting in trouble, was my field assistant had broken the rules, and this was kind of for food health, food safety. He had been down there for the previous winter. He'd been part of the skeleton crew. He had squirreled away, like they'd have a cod meal or a roast pork meal. He had squirreled away 2 portions of that and frozen them down into little blocks. And so we would intersperse the unidentified mutton dehydrated pack with the unidentified beef dehydrated pack, and he had this amazing little round tin of spices and herbs that he could make those pretty tasty as well with the dehy rice or the dehy potato. But it was when he brought out the cod and the roast pork, and coupled with the baking that he had doing those things, it was an amazing thing. So he was creative in both how he was able to take the dehy standard issue stuff and make it palatable and even tasty. He was also creative and broke rules and kind of freezing other meals and bringing them down.
Okay,
cool.
Look, we've got the questions just rolling in now, Dan. We've got 3 fabulous ones. So hang on, where do I go first? Can you see? Oh, here's
Probably
a great
Victoria.
one about. All right, you're going for Vix, yep.
Yeah, so she compliments your presentation, Dan. but then asked,
you.
how do you think we can encourage more Māori into Antarctic research? What barriers do you think might still exist? Tough one.
Yeah, I mean, I think sadly for me, the easiest way for Māori to get to Antarctica is to be a scientist first. That's my read on the current environment, but there's no reason you can't do that. And so, you know, just be a really, really good scientist or social scientist or artist even, because there's those are probably the three main mechanisms that you might be able to get down to Antarctica at the moment. And then maybe that this seminar series might open up more discussions, and that there might actually be some iwi-led or iwi inspired or hapu-led or inspired research projects that can come out. But right now, if you were to ask me, my answer would be find something standard in either meteorology or glaciology or geology or climate or some social aspects or some art. That would be the best way to get down there. Plenty of people have asked me, Dan, you got to Antarctica, how'd you do it? I say my way was so atypical that that's not even close to being, it's not like a standard, this is the way you do it. It was just such chance.
And I'd just like to quickly pump for all of you Māori students out there. There's quite a few Māori scientists if you want role models. So there's Dan, there's Ocean Mercier, who's online as a physicist. There's Gillian Gibbs and Jacqueline Beggs, who are both ecologists. Phil Liver, who went down for 12 years as an ecologist. Miles Lamar at Otago, who's still going down. He's been there for 16 years. And Pete Russell, who's going to be talking at 3, is a physicist as well, physicist / marine person. So actually there's lots of Māori role models if you're inspired about science. So that's just my quick plug.
Thanks,
really good one. I think I wouldn't mind picking up on that that kōrero, particularly around those structures that sort of mean that you have to become a scientist first to get down to Antarctica. So maybe there's some opportunities for some policy people who are really engaged in how you sort of change culture to engage in that kaupapa, to change the structures so that you don't necessarily have to be a scientist to get down there. Yeah.
Okay, I'll give you a quick one, Dan, before there's a fabulous one about other Indigenous peoples. But here's a quick one. Do you still do cryptic crosswords?
I'm still trying to pick who that was. The answer is yes.
Marion.
Oh yeah, hello Marianne. Yes, I still do cryptic crosswords. It's my zone out, my kind of step away from the problem or the research or the teaching for a second and just keep the brain ticking, but in a different and enjoyable way.
Okay, so there's a beautiful question here from Alan Hemmings. So you were operating with the British in the Antarctic Peninsula. So that's an area claimed by the UK, Argentina and Chile. Do you see possibilities of Antarctic cooperation with Indigenous peoples in Chile and Argentina outside the formal framework of states?
Statistically, yes, but probability, no. I'd like to, but I'm just thinking about the record of Chile and Argentina with their Indigenous peoples internally, and then reflecting on how a discussion that they might bring to have with the UK. I mean, so I was remiss in not mentioning this. To get to Antarctica, I had to go to the UK, and I boarded an Air Force plane in Briars Norton RAF base in Oxfordshire, and we flew from there to Dakar, and we dropped off some gear at courses in Senegal. We then stopped on Ascension Island, which is a volcano in the middle of the Atlantic, adjacent somewhat to St. Helena. And those of you who know a little bit of your French and Napoleonic history will know that that's where he was incarcerated after being defeated on St. Helena. And so Ascension Island is basically like a big volcano in the middle of the ocean, and it's got a massive long runway on it. Interestingly, that's the overshot runway for NASA. If their team miss Cape Canaveral, they'll go out and land on that one. That Air Force base for a time, until Desert Storm and probably some other military encounters after that, was the most busy airfield in the world because of the Falklands conflict. They had either plane landing or taking off every 44 seconds for a time. But then we went to the Falklands, and of course the Falklands, the Malvinas, they're contested to be owned by, and I think there might be some Indigenous peoples whakaaro that link back to that as well. So the nature of my answer was based on Indigenous people's influence in their own countries relative to how they might then influence the UK.
Okay, I'm just going to quickly mention that there's been a bit of commentary about human waste. So its current Antarctica New Zealand policy, all solid human waste generated by field parties is returned to New Zealand, thankfully frozen for processing here.
Yeah, and it may well be the case with the British Antarctic Survey now. I did make a point of saying it, and that's about as much as I could do. The response I got was, well, we do ask you to leave it uncovered because the UV is so strong down there that it's going to break it down, even cook it. It's like, but break it down to what? There's no other biological processes. It's just UV, for goodness sakes. But anyway, I'd like to think they might have changed with the times.
Okay, I'm just going to keep going because these questions are amazing. There's another one here that says, thank you for your awesome story. This is from Arawa. If you could go back again, what role would or could the maramataka play? These are really deep questions.
Yeah, and kia ora Arawa. If it's the Arawa I'm thinking of, tēnā koe and our mihi too, who are matua ririata there. I don't know how it would play a role, but it would play a role, probably in mapping out, when we want to be particularly active or when we should be just kind of sitting at base and contemplating and doing things. It would be on that level of planning that I think it would play a role. Like if we're thinking, okay, we should shift between Camp A and Camp B, when's a good time, or when are some good windows of times for us to be doing that.
Okay, there's a question here from Imogen. So what can we do as educators to encourage Māori students to pursue earth and marine sciences? And I imagine this is quite close to your heart, Dan, eh?
Yeah, gosh, how long have we got? Actually, I do need to, I've got to be somewhere at 2 2. I've got to talk on marine protected areas and why we might not necessarily support them. For a master's class. But in response to that question, just pick interesting stuff. Don't try and baffle them with boring stuff. And the other element that I always bring is we need to show them that if you understand mātauranga, if you understand pūrākau, if you understand maramataka, you're a scientist, because the methods that you employ there are exactly the same methods that we use in science. And so, I think we need to be clear with our kids that you don't need permission to be scientists. That's in your whakapapa. That's who you are. That's how come we're here today. It's because our ancestors practiced things. We called it mātauranga, but effectively it was the scientific method as well, but explained according to a Māori worldview. So to just into the earth and into the ocean sciences, just look at the mātauranga, look at the pūrākau. If you understand those, then you're a scientist, then you're an ocean scientist, then you're a glaciologist.
Yeah,
Okay,
awesome kōrero.
No,
Did you want to ask another question, Scylla? Or?
No,
yeah, I can take a couple
I was
more.
going to say,
Yeah.
Can you? There's still questions
Yeah, they're coming
unanswered. And I've just answered one as well on the chat around profiles. So Billy, do you want to grab another one?
Yeah. So Victoria. Oh no. So I just wanted to highlight Victoria's question there. Great to hear Scylla's list of Māori researchers that are working down there, and I think it's to make that public, creating a profile for those people so that there's visibility. That's the intent of this seminar series, so that people can see that Māori are doing research down in Antarctica. I think we started off thinking that, there's not too many Māori going down there, but there seems to be a good cohort of role models for people to follow. So hopefully this seminar series starts off that conversation. All right.
There's another great comment here about place names, which says, I think you stand a good chance to influence place names, standards and conventions through SCAR, LINZ in Antarctica, New Zealand. It would be great to see more, particularly in the Ross Sea region. So interestingly enough, my team, so this is from Jamie, is planning to head to Mount Tuatara next season for some glacial geology. So the site was named such from a field survey party in the 1960s.
Yeah, and it's interesting because back then you could just do your dog, your cat, your next door neighbor, your favorite brand of tobacco. It was easier to get names through them. But I do agree, and in particular, if we take the lead of the New Zealand Geographic Names Board. So, for example, now if a name doesn't exist for a place, they will refer to Te Kahurumanu, which is the Ngāi Tahu Cultural Atlas, and say if there's anything on there, they by definition will be incorporated as part of the New Zealand Geographic Boards. So that's an example where we could get New Zealand to lean on, you know, the team who were based out of the UK. And then, you know, and the other thing is it's about where you are in your careers and trajectories. You know, I've just been appointed as a UNESCO Commissioner for Culture. So if I'm going to put in an application now, they're going to listen to a UNESCO Commissioner for Culture for New Zealand. They're not going to listen to some upstart, you know, young scientist who's just kind of make his career. So, you know, in the right places, you need to assert your mana.
Okay, we've got a question from Esme here on Māori links to the land in Antarctica. Are there considerations that should currently be made when samples are collected in Antarctica and returned to New Zealand?
Yeah, and I think it would be more about the bringing stuff from offshore and then to New Zealand, which would be where Māori would have a significant say. So I can't give detail on that, but the question should be asked. We should have a process for working through that.
Okay, and we've got 3 other comments. So this is your last moment, people, if you've got a last burning question while I just read out these comments. So Vic says, great points about other routes to get down there. So Hane Nielsen's also put in the Q&A, there's another way south. You can go through the PCAS qualification at the University of Canterbury, and she's put a link in there. But other routes to get down there. So Vic says, I love the idea of iwi-led research. It was also great to hear you list all those Māori researchers. And then Alan in the Q&A has also put in something about sewage. So a whole lot of what actually happens there for those who are interested.
Kia ora. Well, thank you so much, Dan, for your presentation. I think you've stirred the pot, but got us all thinking, and all the questions are sort of coming in right now. If your question didn't get answered, we apologise, but we will make sure that all of this kōrero is captured in the video and in comments on the website. So don't feel too disheartened there, and there'll be a mechanism for you to engage with that and ask your questions as you take this kōrero away and engage with your whānau in the conversation, and broaden it out from there. I just wanted to sort of wrap up. Did you want to have any last words, Dan?
No, I just really wanted to thank you, Billy and Scylla and the rest of the Rosramp team for creating this opportunity. And it has been an honour and a privilege to have participated.
Thank you. It's been amazing to have you. And as I said, I think you're a massive draw card being on the ballot. And on that note, we've got another presentation coming up at 3 p.m. So please make sure you rock up to that one. This will be Dr. Pete Russell, Ngāpui. He's down at Otago, and he's going to be speaking about Antarctic ice melt, and more particularly how we might think about sea level rise in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So super topical for Hapu and Iwi, especially around the edges of the Ropu. So Pete's just jumped on. But we're running out of time very quickly, so I wouldn't mind Tawarahi. Matua, would you mind turning your microphone on?
Kia ora, kia
ora, Matua, thank you.
O tēnā koe.
Tukuna hoki taku te mihi o taku nei mokopuna justice.
Oh, tēnā koe, kei te mohi area justice. Oh, rawe.
Ka pai. E pairawa hoki tō kōrero e kara.
Tēnā koe matua.
Kia ora. Okay, Tawarahi, if you wouldn't mind closing with karakia for us, if that's all right. Yeah. Kia ora. Thank you, everyone.
Wenu tēnei, te pau ka, te pau tēnei mai. Te ahu I roto wānanga, I roto kōrero I roto. Tēnā, te umu kai, ki te umu tēnei whaiho. Ka māta ko hautu, ka māta ko humahi. Ka mā moi tū, ka mā moi rere, ka mā moi te whakaari te tāpara. Ka mau tātua mau awu te tāpara. Ka mā ngā pūkenga, ka mā ngā wānanga, ka mā hoki mātou e ngā tauhi. A turuturu a tai, turuturu a uta. A whanno, whanno. Hara mai te toki a haunge hui e. Tai.
Tēnā koe matua.